One of you guys recommended this video. Let's check it out. So this video is from Bellalar, one of them. Links in the chat so you can check them out. Send him some love. Tell him I sent you. But this video is on the the Bethesda creation engine. And actually, I think he makes a pretty decent point, which we'll kind of summarize as we go through this. We're not going to watch likely the entire thing, but I do want to check out the initial wave and then we'll comment on it.
Is the creation engine holding Bethesda and Starfield back? Yeah, that's a pretty loaded question, and this has been a...
Yes. Thank you for watching the video, everybody. It's been a great time. Okay, I'll stop being an asshole. Honestly, if that's the question that this video seeks to answer, my opinion to that question is the creation engine and their tech holding with like BGS and Starfield more specifically back. I would say yeah. There's a lot of things that people would have liked to have seen in Starfield that is just frankly not present, and it's purely, as far as I can tell, because of technical restrictions. In the same way, like vehicles, which even the most hardcore BGS Starfield stan will agree vehicles would have made the game better. Even something like that seems to be absent purely because of technical restrictions.
A debate that I've seen happen online for a really, really, really long time. And I've kind of seen the many different sides of it, right? You see a lot of people look at the new games and think, oh, wow, look at those. Look at Red Dead Redemption 2. Look at those characters' faces and that detail. And then, or even, other like modern games, contemporaries that are coming out right now. Even to take a look at some of the, the facial animation performances that are going on in a game like Baldur's Gate 3. And people are like, oh yeah, Larry, an independent studio making Baldur's Gate 3. Then they take a look at Starfield NPCs talking. Turns out there's like some sort of muscle that they don't move to basically make their eyes slightly squint whenever they smile. And apparently that's the reason why the smiles, particularly in Starfield, penetrate your soul and make you feel deep.
Yeah. Starfield smiles are something else, dude. It's like an alien trying to mimic a human being. That's what it looks like. Personally, I'm not that bothered by like facial animation quality, by like the individual graphics. What I'm talking about when I say that I think the creation engine is holding BGS back, I'm talking about like mechanics that are holding it back. Graphically, it clearly is not at the top of the heap, but I think like I do think mechanistically it's holding them back. But yeah, some people are bothered by the graphic limitations more so than I am. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think if you're looking at a video game and you're like, oh, I would have loved the game, but their smiles are weird, I think maybe the game wasn't going to be for you to begin with,
Deeply, ill at ease. Yeah, I don't know, man. Bethesda faces. I suppose that'll always be a thing. This has been a very heated topic, though, and the big problem here is an engine is one thing in the heads of those who play games and don't have a technical background, and in the heads of people who do make games and do have a technical background, an engine is another thing. But what very often happens is one group of people kind of bashes the other one for not knowing, right? Now, I'm going to contend that it's not your job to know what a game engine is. If we're raising the bar of participating in games discourse to the point where a fan of a game is like, these faces look bad, why does it feel janky, why does that look mid? And someone's like, you just don't understand game engines. Or maybe somebody's like, this doesn't look good to me. Oh, creation engine, shit, hate it. And it's like, is that the most nuanced take on the creation engine? No, it's not. Is it how that person feels? Like, yes, it is.
And I agree. I think this is actually a really good point. Whether it's like I've said before, perception is often more important than reality, especially in the realm of consumer concerns. If the customer feels that something is bad, it doesn't really matter if factually that's not the case, because the perception is that it's bad. And so then the seller or whoever's involved, the firm involved with it, has to address that concern, even if it's not factually correct. Like, for example, you guys know Kraft mac and cheese? I'm digging deep with this reference, okay? We talked about this in one of my business school classes. Kraft mac and cheese used a particular dye to make their mac and cheese really bright yellow. There was a lady, I believe she went by the name The Food Babe. And The Food Babe was some lady who was super rich and bored, I guess. And so she started to make videos complaining about various food elements and things that you would eat. It's a phenomenon known as like chemophobia, people that are just scared of things that sound artificial or like chemicals, even though pretty much everything is a chemical. So like she was saying that you shouldn't eat McDonald's fries because the oil that they use to fry the fries has a defoaming agent that keeps it from bubbling up. And that same defoaming agent is used in like jet fuel. It's used in all sorts of industrial applications as well. And therefore eating McDonald's French fries is basically the same as eating fries boiled in jet fuel, which is patently absurd. It's just insane. It's like saying that, oh, well, you know that water is one of the key ingredients in antifreeze. Therefore, when you drink green tea, you're drinking antifreeze. It's like, no, no, it's just not, you're not even wrong. Like, you're so far away from being right. It's just not even, like, where do we even begin? But she started campaigning for this very yellow food coloring to be removed from this particular mac and cheese package in the UK, I think it was. She was saying that it was doing things like giving kids, I think she was implying that it would give them cancer. Don't quote me on all this. This has been a while since I looked at it. But she said it caused like cancer, sicknesses and illnesses, maybe even autism, all this stuff because of a yellow food coloring in this mac and cheese. Now, that was factually and patently false. It did not do any of those things, but the perception in that community in the UK grew to the point that people started to actually believe that this yellow food coloring caused all these adverse health effects. So Kraft, to just deal with the perception, they just removed the food coloring. They were like, it's going to be cheaper and easier to just remove the food coloring and sell it without that food coloring. So they shut up. It's going to be cheaper to do that than to try and like educate these people on chemistry and how this actually works. That was an instance where a firm was dealing with the perception of something rather than the factual element of it. And with something like video games, if the perception is that a particular studio's games are graphically very lackluster or are outdated in terms of tech because they rely on constant load screens or all of this, even if you can point to other games in the industry that also have all those load screens, that also have similar graphical styles and fidelity for the same price, even if you can like fact check and show that maybe that perception is not completely correct, it still doesn't really matter. You still have to address the perception because for everybody that like, for every 10 people that proclaims that Starfield's engine and tech is out of date, even if you do like a fact check and you correct them on that, assuming that that's not correct, there's going to be like only 2 of those people that actually hear that. And maybe even one of them is actually convinced that they were wrong. So you still have to deal with the 9 out of 10 people that are holding to the original position. You have to deal again with the perception, not just the reality, if you actually want to deal with things. It's called cheesy pasta in the UK. Oh, wow. Cheesy pasta. I love me some cheesy pasta.
Is there truth in what they're saying? Yes. The fact that they're not perfectly, on target when they are talking about a specialized thing in a field that they're not in, that's like a crazy thing to start bashing people for. The amount of like, you don't fully understand what a game engine is. Be gone, peasant. The amount of that you see from some of the press, stuff like that, I think it kind of sucks. But
I think so too, and it's extremely unproductive. And frankly, it's just bad faith argumentation and debate to dismiss somebody's opinion because they don't work in a given field. Like, if somebody in the game engine industry, if that's an industry, sub-industry or something, if somebody that is a game engine engineer, let's say, and they design these things and code them and work on them constantly, if they come along and say, no, I think the creation engine has a ton of strengths, yeah, it has some weaknesses too, but overall for the games that they're making, it is the best tool in the industry for them to use. Again, that would be them fact-checking the opinion of the consumer. But my point is, it doesn't really matter for the consumer because love it or hate it, the customer is always right. When the customer feels like something's out of date, you got to deal with that first and foremost. It doesn't matter if you can fact check it. I think it's stupid. I wish we lived in a world where you could just be like, no, stupid, yellow food coloring doesn't give you autism. I wish we could just say that and then everybody goes, oh, okay, back to business. But no, we don't live in a world like that. You have to deal with the perception, and it sucks, but that's just how it is.
Do actually want to engage in the topic, and that's what we're going to be doing today. It's funny because these days it's as if on the internet everyone is expected to be an absolute expert on everything, and if they're not, they'll be laughed at, and that's actually really bad for our levels of understanding, quality of discourse. So what I'm going to try to do is to break a few things down, make it super simple, and then we're just going to walk through things to see what's going on with the creation engine and how creation engine is the reason why Starfield exists, and it's also the reason why Starfield exists. Oh yeah. got quite a lot of things to share. Something that happened since I wrote my outline for today's video is, the Unity runtime, the way they want to charge for every install of that. Imagine that's the core, right? This special black box. It's full of demon magic. Nobody knows how it works, but there it is, and it's doing things. That's the very core of your engine. Then, think of, I just want to say modules. Big systems that exist on your engine. These are going to be things like, your render, how your sound is done, your animation system. If we're to go way back in time, is it a deferred renderer or not? All of these things, all the kind of nuts and bolts of how those things work that are there in a rather generic sense, right? Oh, yep, you use Unity, you've got the physically based renderer. Okay. And then we're just going to have what I'm going to call plugins and tools. And that might be a little tool that you make to make just a little bit of your game creation process be a little bit easier. Maybe you want some more procedural generation tools for terrain so that your developers can make terrain faster. Well, you build your little terrain system, there you go, you plug it in. A really good example for our game, the Pale Beyond, the words in this game are all written in something called Inkle, right? Of course, we were using Unity as the game engine. We had to make those things talk to each other. We also had this little system developed called Inkstructions that allowed us to do some very cool and handy things. That's kind of what I'd say is an example of a plugin, right? It's a tool that you can make to help you do your job using this game engine. And often, it's actually less the core game engine that gives you the features that you see on the game, and it's far more iterations on modules and like little plugins and tools for the engine that allows the developer to, in that engine, build the new feature or just make content more efficiently, right? And you look at Unity and Unreal. I think Unity's got 3,000 engine developers. Unreal, of course, they're very concerned about their core and their modules, right? Because if you're a development team, like we were with Pale, you need to make a bunch of custom things that will exist on top of Unity that will allow you to do all of the things that, as an example, we wanted to do to make our game that, who knows what page this is on, but our game that looks vaguely like this, right? Now, if you're making another type of game in Unity, well, you're going to make different little plugins, different tools. Maybe you'll grab different things from the asset store. And when I say asset store, you might be thinking grabbing a bunch of trees from it. No, asset store could be something like save load system. It could be a particular shader that you like the look of. Okay, so these companies are engine development companies. Their thing is they make their engine really damn good. But also with that, to make their engine be capable of doing a lot of things, potentially including things you might not even need for your game, so you may just lose a little bit of efficiency in using one of those off-the-shelf engines, right? Now, some very large companies can get what's called like a source code license, which will let them really just dive into the guts of Unreal and make all of the super custom things that they want.
That's what I assume that like CDPR got. I would think, because the fact that walking away from the Red Engine is so insane to me to begin with. That I mean, you play Phantom Liberty and then come back to me and be like, yeah, it makes sense that they're getting rid of it. Dude, that engine is wild. And the fact that they're just walking away from it for Unreal Engine is even crazier. So we'll see if it pays off. They've got to have a reason. They've got to have something they've seen with Unreal Engine that makes it all worth it. And that's where I'm like, they've invested so many tens or even realistically hundreds of millions of dollars into the Red Engine 4 that they have to have a very good reason to be moving to Unreal Engine. And I can't wait to see what that is. Either it's going to be one of the biggest blunders ever, or there's something else they're seeing. Recruiting, they're opening new studios. That could be it, Matt. Because in case it's not clear, what Matt's suggesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, is that it's for the ease of access of learning. Because a lot of people go to art schools and stuff, and they are taught in the Unreal Engine because it's accessible, it's easy to understand, people can get their hands on it in school and start to learn it. So you could hire more people that already work in Unreal Engine, and you don't have to spend 6 months or a year training them in how to use this tool set. So that could be part of it, for sure. I don't know if that's enough to dump an engine that is like you've invested hundreds of millions of dollars into.
So when you use an off-the-shelf engine, what do you get? You get modularity, you get flexibility. Unity, Unreal, and they've managed to sell so many different studios, and that means that they will have a real...
I would guess nowadays it's going to be mostly Unreal. I think a lot of people are going to be walking away from Unity after all this
good
crap.
Focus on the core of their product and that flexibility. Maybe more so in Unity than Unreal. I think Unreal is definitely more of like a, 3D kind of AAA looking, AA looking game thing. But you might then say, what about in-house engines? And this is where I'm going to bring up a really hilarious thing. Legacy support. Did you know, it's crazy, but so much of the global banking system runs on a very old programming language called COBOL. Yes, quite odd. Ever wonder if you're a Windows user why there's like multiple versions of the control panel in your computer? A lot of that's like legacy support from way back in the day. So what happens? Your Windows, you want to make Windows 11, but you got to support a bunch of features from ages ago because you got all this legacy code. And that's kind of going to be my bridge into...
Yeah, my dad works as a project manager with Microsoft, and my uncle works at Microsoft, but he actually does. And it's like a running joke inside Microsoft that they need to just rewrite the whole thing because there's so much crap in Windows, apparently, that is just not needed anymore. They're like, yeah, if we rewrote this and cut out huge chunks of it, it would run way more efficiently. You could see performance and power improvements that would be wild and just crazy improved. Are they ever going to do that? I would guess eventually they probably do, but I mean, at this point, you don't really need to. Like, it's so frustrating that something like that would make such huge improvements, but instead we get like Windows 11, which launches and just ruins support for pretty much everything. Like day one, you know, it's crazy.
In a way, the strengths and the weaknesses of doing your own custom in-house engine. So this, if you're an engineer, this is what you want. I mean, if you're an engine engineer, right? You just get to sit down there and make some incredible software. And what this means is you get to make an engine specifically for the game that you're building. You don't have to worry about that flexibility as much, the modularity as much. You got to make the perfect engine for that game. I'm going to give you two examples. One of them is Overwatch. Now, this one I kind of know because some Overwatch, I had one Overwatch team league. I also, more importantly, though, for this, had an Overwatch esports person sort of fill me in on some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. So, if you were there in and around Overwatch League Season 1, you would have noticed that they had awful spectator tools. This will become relevant later, but when it came out, Overwatch ran amazingly, felt smooth as butter, right? Look at Battlefield 3. Were we not all rather wowed by Battlefield 3 when that came out? Like, that really was pushing things forward. It was so impressive, and I think it was Frostbite 2 that was doing that. And of course, this makes sense because DICE made Frostbite to make Battlefield games. Now, here we see fantastic strengths. Battlefield, impressive for its time. Overwatch, impressive for its time. Both games, custom engines, very, very cool. But what happens when you're using a custom engine, but now your scope changes? What happens if, say,
you want to use it for something not Battlefield?
the Bobster himself, Mr. Kotick, pushes for the Overwatch League? Well, did you know that the Overwatch League suffered massively from awful spectator tools? And here's the problem. It was really hard and it took loads of time to make esports quality spectator tools for Overwatch. Because Overwatch was its own custom engine. It was made to do Overwatch, the game that came out, right? And that was a pain in the ass for them. Loads of the work that was taking Overwatch 1 into, you know, that game that didn't come out, Overwatch 2? I'm still waiting on it. Loads of that would have been because Overwatch 2 had a far larger scope than Overwatch 1. The engine needed to do new tricks, right? And then, of course, what happens when, you know, your Electronic Arts, I think this is the era of John Riccitiello. Okay, double checked. It is the era of John Riccitiello, current CEO of Unity, who is, you know, having a bit of drama right now. So what happens, right? Mass Effect comes out. Mass Effect 2 comes out. You then want money now and line go up, so you make Mass Effect 3 come out within 18 months, meaning the Mass Effect 3 isn't as good as it could be. And then you're like, oh man, we've got all these Dragon Age games coming out. We need a new Mass Effect. Mass Effect's printing the money. But I don't want to pay 5 or 10% to Unreal. Ugh, look at the Swedes over there at DICE. They've made this thing called Frostbite. Make your Mass Effect Andromeda on Frostbite. Make Dragon Age Inquisition on Frostbite. Make Anthem, because now you're making a live service game, on Frostbite. Frostbite is an awesome engine. Used incorrectly, what we have in our hands is an absolute unmitigated disaster because it was a massive change of scope. Frostbite was being made to do things that Frostbite just couldn't do. And of course, it's a custom engine. It's not like any old experienced game developer from another.
Oh, dude, those old Mass Effect Andromeda, like, cringe compilations, those were a dream. Those were so great.
And that's kind of how you end in all of these, you know, Overwatch 2 shit show situations, Anthem situations, where humongous amounts of work and prototyping is just thrown straight out of the window. So you can see here the pros and the cons of rolling with your own engine. Mass Effect Andromeda suffered terribly, everything BioWare did suffered terribly, yada yada yada. We all kind of know the story, and that means it's Bethesda time. This is the spicy bit.
Oh, baby!
Okay. In 1997, Numerical Design Limited released the NetImmerse engine. Bethesda game studios, who were looking to evolve from the in-house X engine, funny sort of wording, which is their own engine, they wanted to move away from that, so they decided to license NetImmerse, and they used it to build Morrowind. And that is how they moved from like Elder Scrolls Arena, Elder Scrolls, Daggerfall, etc., into Morrowind. And that engine would evolve into Gamebrio. And Gamebrio would basically power Morrowind, Oblivion, and Fallout 3. But then Gamebrio, was kind of showing its age. They kind of knew a new console generation would be coming up. They want to do cool new things with Skyrim, so what do? Well, they forked their Fallout 3 version of Gamebrio. Now, I didn't say they forked Gamebrio. They forked their Fallout 3 version, and I say that very specifically because any developer will add a humongous stack of their own in-house tools and technology on top of whatever engine they're using to build the game.
Probably best example of this happening is Rocksteady. Rocksteady used Unreal Engine 3 for, I think it was both, was it also Arkham Asylum? They used it at least for Arkham City and Arkham Knight. So even Arkham Knight is running in Unreal Engine 3. And if you just look at Arkham Knight today, I still think Arkham Knight is one of, if not still one of the top 10 graphically impressive games available. Like today, I think it outshines many games that are releasing on modern hardware. It's stunning how crazy that game is. And that was an Unreal Engine 3 title. But it wasn't just Unreal Engine 3. Like you can download, I don't know if you can actually download it still, but it wasn't the same engine that you would download it through the Epic launcher. It was heavily altered. So they worked with Epic and they went in and like reworked huge portions of it to create physics simulations, smoke simulations, the rain effects. Yeah, exactly. No one does wet like Arkham games. Exactly, Sammy. Like it was crazy how impressive that is. To this day, it's still graphically stunning. And it would have looked good with just vanilla Unreal Engine, but Rocksteady's reworked version of it was ridiculous. Which is why, again, Suicide Squad is all the more depressing.
As an example, right, even for us, even for a basic game like ours, okay, so here's Captain Hunt looking a little bit rough. There he is. Now, we need to place him on the screen. How do we do that? Well, we build a custom staging system that just handles a bunch of shit for us. And it's a great development tool that lets us make that content a bit faster. We have a custom implementation of fmod that's able to talk to our various different things. The script, which we do in Inkle being this, it's almost like a writing language for people who are also programmers. It lets you do some really cool things in the narrative game space. But we had to get it to talk with our build of, with our stuff we were doing in Unity, and we wanted to make a bunch of tools.
What's his game called? Yeah, this is interesting. Bellala Studios. Interesting. 5 years ago, this kind of crew set through a pale passage in search of the absolute magnetic south. The ship and its crew were tragically lost to the ice, never to be seen again. Her sister ship, the Temperance, shall follow in her path. Yeah, so it's like inspired by the Franklin expedition. That's super cool. I love it.
We do some really cool things in the narrative game space, but we had to get it to talk with our build of, with our stuff we were doing in Unity, and we wanted to make a bunch of tools to help us debug and help us do things with the script. So we have this system called Inkstruction. It's a shitload of code, shitload of custom stuff. The only version of Unity exists in is the one that we have, because we built it on top of that. These are the kind of tools that actually help you make the game on top of the engine. So even for a simple game like ours, there's a hell of a lot. You can imagine then, if you're moving from Morrowind into Oblivion, into Fallout, can you imagine the amount of custom stuff? And obviously, like any good code base, it was probably a total shit show because, if you're a programmer, you know how it is. It's the way that it goes. Now, this means that by the time they'd made Fallout 3, that was the most advanced version of the Gamebrio engine that they had. They made all the tools, all the tech. And from that, to build the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, the creation engine is born. Now, I have a question. Is the creation engine Gamebrio? Ship of Theseus, right? Keeps on changing. And here's a fun example. Take Star Citizen. You see a spot on a planet, you can go to it, right?
Sure can. I thought that wasn't possible. In Star Citizen, you can do everything people wanted Starfield to do. I don't think it always makes for the best video game, which is why I want to be clear. I don't necessarily think that Starfield is better in terms of gameplay and active like dopamine rushes and the drip, drip, drip of gameplay loops and everything. Because it's more of a hardcore space sim is how it functions. However, that being said, the way Starfield handles their limited scope, I think is bad. I think the way that they constantly have everything segmented with these hard-locked little tile fishbowl things for you to explore that have repeated content all over the place, I think the way they handled that was bad. But I also think that like if we're trying to talk about like a fun video game with a consistent gameplay loop, I also don't think Star Citizen is the answer. Because it can be pretty slow. You'll load into the game and like you want to go hop in your ship and fly away. It's like a solid 5 to 10 minutes before you get in your ship and are flying away.
The amount of just incredible streaming and stuff that they're able to do to actually make a simulation that detailed run at such a scale. Yes, it has bugs. There are a lot of other issues with Star Citizen. Those are kind of beside the point for now, but certainly a lot of the things that people sort of wish they could do in Starfield, you can do in Star Citizen. To do that, they built it in CryEngine, then Lumberyard, then or whatever it was. Amazon actually got really pissy about it, and there's a whole thing going on. But a really good example was like CryEngine was 32-bit. They needed 64-bit precision, so they had to rip a whole bunch of that out and just rebuild it. So the creation engine is the Gamebrio engine, but it also isn't because all of these things change. id Tech 3 built Call of Duty 1. That then morphed into the IW engine, Infinity Ward, right? Still quite id Tech, but they built a shitload of stuff, and they kept on iterating that. If you just look at
yeah, when people are like, "Whoa, they haven't been doing anything in Star Citizen for however many, like a decade of development and $600 million later," they have been. I think you can definitely argue that it's been a poorly managed project, but Good God Almighty, they've done a lot. Like, they've rebuilt the game engine like 3 times or something. It's ridiculous.
With the various different versions of the Infinity Ward engine, you can see that that genealogy. You can see how it kind of runs straight back up the years as they keep on building stuff. And, you know, eventually you've built so many things, you've ripped out the core, built a totally new thing, that it's absolutely a Ship of Theseus-like situation. So to go to the creation engine then, Todd and his team needed more bells and whistles. The creation engine project then basically involves turning their Fallout 3 fork of Gamebrio into this new thing with sort of new headline features called the creation engine. And
my favorite story of the development of Fallout 3, though, is that when they were coming off of Oblivion to make Fallout 3, they were using the same engine before, right? And they were just trying to upgrade it and tweak it, Gamebrio, and rework that. My favorite story comes from one of the interviews of the behind the scenes making of Fallout 3. And they described how, because the engine had never been used to create gunplay, they didn't have any systems for gunplay. And so what they did is initially they basically created guns that functioned as invisible bows. And then the bullets were just really fast arrows. And so you'd fire your invisible bow that looks like a gun, and it would shoot an arrow out super, super quickly. That was not the size of a full arrow, but was tiny, tiny. And it would track and then hit the target and everything. And it didn't end up working, so they had to completely rework it and figure it out. But it's one of my favorite examples of game designers and engineers trying to come up with creative ways to get a new mechanic, again, talking about scope changes, working in an old tool set.
And then the creation engine evolves, right? If you compare Fallout 76 to Fallout 4, you see big changes. They have a lot of new procedural generation tech. They have new global lighting that is way, way, way better. And, of course...
Did it or did it not have
16 times the detail?
That's the question.
Though, still, at the time of Fallout 76, it was clear to everybody that cracks were showing. Now, of course there were cracks, because you look at Unity and Unreal, massive corporations with humongous technology teams, you know, like Unity of 3,000 people working in the engine. Todd doesn't have that many working in the creation engine. That's...
Yeah, Todd, figure it out. Every time I see him, I'm jealous of his watch. Look at that nice Omega moon phase. I forget the exact name of it. Look at that thing. I'm happy for you, Todd. Put that Fallout 76 money to good use, I'll tell you what.
It's definitely a false comparison, by the way. I'm not making that as a serious point. Kind of more of a jest. But anyway, you know, they don't have as much. Now, the tech people at Bethesda are not bad. But what they have to do is they have to focus on the features that will enable their gameplay designers to make content for the players. And every coder will have nice-to-haves, things they wish they could rewrite, technical debt they wish they could squash. I am sure there are coders there who, you know, they were thinking about modern save load technology. You know, they probably thought, if we really put our effort into that, we could probably do that. We could probably make it so that if a player runs in, 4 kilometers or 3 kilometers in this direction, then more of the world just spawns, and you don't have a load screen that forces you to jump back to the planetary view, where you can move your thing over to the side and then jump back down into the planet. Now, of course, while that would have been technically cool in the way that it is very impressive that you can just fly anywhere on a planet in Star Citizen, think about the design of Starfield. It is more of a content-based Bethesda game than it is a roaming about the place and seeing what happens Bethesda game, which I believe, I think it was a recent PC Gamer article, actually did a really good job of explaining the different kind of modes of Bethesda play and how Starfield is very focused on do content rather than roam about the place and see what happens. I enjoy it sort of for the content, but to me it's inferior to other Bethesda games because it doesn't have that kind of whole cohesive and immersive experience.
I totally agree with this. I think Starfield is built to have you fast travel around to different objectives and to follow quests pretty closely. It's not actually very good for just going and exploring, which is a bummer as somebody that really loved going out and exploring in Fallout 4, in like Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim, or in Oblivion or Fallout 3. Those games really excelled at just letting you wander around and discover cool stuff. Starfield's really bad if you try to play it that way. And so it's just a different kind of game. And my frustration with it is that they sold it on it being an space adventure game, like a game where you just navigate space, you go explore different planets. But if you actually try to play it that way, you're gonna have a bad time. And that's why I think it's fair to say that it feels inferior to previous Bethesda games, especially in terms of exploration, certainly. So I think that's fair.
But anyhow, you can totally see how any of the technical issues that you could have with Starfield, those coders could have gotten around those if they had the time, if they had the...
It's also, it reminds me of what Todd Howard said, I think it was in the Making of Oblivion video, where he said to his team, we can do anything, we just can't do everything. This is a perfect explanation of that, where they could have had seamless surface to space transitions. They could have had it so walking into a building doesn't require a load screen. They could have had it so it used a cinematic camera instead of this weird front-on camera that they chose to use for some asinine reason, even though they already had it working in Fallout 4. They could have done all of that, but instead they chose to go the route that they did. That's where design choices come in. That's where you can evaluate the decisions of the game designers like Todd, Emil Pagliarulo on the narrative side, and a lot of the other people involved with BGS games. And that's where you can critique the game, because they did a lot, but they made very specific choices in one way over the other. And that's where we can critique it. I think the shift to going towards this front-on camera angle when they had the cinematic run working already, I thought that was a bad decision. I thought the cinematic camera was frankly way better. Even something like Baldur's Gate 3, which is a super massive RPG, has a better cinematic camera system than Starfield when BGS already had the cinematic cameras working in Fallout 4. It's probably the most baffling thing about Starfield to me, other than the vehicles being absent, is this. Same thing with like the choice not to have vehicles on the planet's surface to help you get between points of interest. I think that that was a strange decision, because now players just have to run for 3 minutes doing nothing through empty expanses while they run to a point of interest on a planet's surface. Clearly they didn't put vehicles in because of technical restrictions, and also because people would have found the end of like the walls of the fish bowls much faster, so they didn't want to encourage that. I still think it's a bad decision. It's not really a fix to it. But this is what we evaluate. We always evaluate the decisions, the things that they brought, the things that they didn't bring, and try to come to a conclusion as to whether those decisions were correct.
The budget, but instead think about the sorts of things that Todd and team say when they talk about the creation engine. They're primarily focused on tools that lead to immediate player-facing things. As an example, procedural generation tech to allow for the back-of-the-box feature of there being like what, I think like 1,000 planets and 100 you can visit, or whatever it is. The global lighting that makes the Starfield... Okay, so in a game like Starfield, you know the way you got your randomly generated crowd characters, or just kind of like, you know, random components, and then you've got like your full, you know, proper like A-list characters. I mean, you look at some of those A-list characters with really nice lighting, especially indoors, and it can look quite fantastic. It looks great in a screenshot, looks great in an E3 presentation or whatever, because they've focused on building the lighting system, a player-facing system. Now, of course, you know, don't tell them that the second you go outside and everything becomes very flatly lit, that all the characters start to look really bad. But anyway, you can see how a lot of that creation engine development went into things that are directly sellable to players. They didn't go into other things that perhaps could have led to having a game that had less Bethesda jank.
It also is just a matter of, again, their customers. If the fans don't care about certain things, they're just not going to rework it. Because why would they? I mean, again, it's like Todd Howard said in that interview, where he was like, honestly, we could have worked on the seamless planet to space transitions, but we don't think that's important to the player experience. And that we don't think our players, frankly, care that much about that type of thing. And I think that that's totally correct. I think their players clearly don't care about those load screens that are constantly popping up. They just don't. They tune it out. And that's awesome. I'm glad that you're able to tune it out. A lot of other people can't just tune it out. It sticks out like a sore thumb, especially when you're playing other games that are releasing contemporarily that have far surpassed that. And I think it just comes up and it brings up the question of standards that have changed and shifted. With BG3, we're talking about a game that has raised the standard and the bar for narrative RPGs. Whether you like it or not, if you market your game as a narrative RPG, you will be compared to BG3 because it's raised the bar of what can be done. That's why we made fun of all of those developers at Ubisoft and EA and all these other groups for freaking out when they said, when consumers were like, hey, this raises the bar for RPGs. And they're like, no, it shouldn't though, because then that'll make it harder to make stuff. It's like, yeah, but that's what happens when the bar is raised. And when BGS puts themselves into the genre of like space exploration light sim game, they're going to be compared to No Man's Sky, to space, to Star Citizen, to Elite Dangerous, to all of these other games. Whether or not they're trying to do exactly the same thing, they will be compared. They just will be. They entered that comparison when they called their game and put it into that same genre. The peers will be compared. And so I don't find it that shocking that these things get brought up constantly. Now, kind of to summarize the broader point he makes towards the end of the video so we can speed this along, does this actually matter for something like The Elder Scrolls 6? Does it actually matter? Will the creation engine hold that back? And I think he actually brings up an interesting point, which is that the creation engine's problems and limitations reared their ugly head very forcefully in Starfield because of the kind of game it was and is. Whereas The Elder Scrolls 6 probably won't make those limitations that obvious. And I think that's correct. In Starfield, because you're constantly warping to different planets and you're running around and fast traveling constantly, it really makes those load screens obvious. Whereas in The Elder Scrolls 6, if you're wandering around like you did in Skyrim, that's probably not that obvious. Hopefully they can get rid of load screens between
Venom
like
Gaming
walking in
super
buildings,
chatted
but still.
$12.07. Bethesda always gets the biggest pass out of any developer I know of. They make good mod platforms but mediocre games. It's not the devs that make the games good and fix it. It's always the community.
I do think that BGS gets the biggest free pass of any dev that I can think of. I can't really think of another that puts out consistently like buggy and problematic games that the community has to immediately fix. I can't really think of one that is even comparable. So I agree. Like the fact that DLSS was not implemented day one, when AMD came out and said, we don't have an exclusivity contract, they could put it in. They came out and said that like a week and a half, 2 weeks before the game came out. And on day one of it launching in early access, somebody put in a mod to add DLSS. And now they've announced that, you know, I think they either have or they're about to bring DLSS officially to the game. But something like that is just stunning that they didn't fix that day one. Or like other modders have fixed the inventory system, because the inventory UI is so horrid that trying to select a different weapon requires you to manually click on each one to compare stats and remember what the last one was, to compare damage numbers and everything. And somebody went in, redid the UI so that you can actually just compare damage numbers down the row. Instantly. Way better. Way better. But the modders had to do it. And so I agree. I think they get a free pass often. Why aren't they hiring these modders? I think they occasionally do, and they do like the paid mod thing. But it's why I tweeted out, or sorry, I X'd out, if that's the term, this post that I just ended up muting because it was getting really toxic. But I tweeted this out because a new Starfield mod called Slower Than Light allows players to finally travel between planet to planet in seamless space travel by letting ships reach speeds more than 100 times the speed of light. So again, basically just seamless space travel. And I just asked, can someone more technically inclined than me explain to me how it's possible for a modder to do this in a couple of weeks while BGS works on a game for 5 years and can't manage it? I'm genuinely baffled how modders are able to do this stuff so quickly on effectively no budget while BGS shrugs while acting like it's impossible. And I will amend this because this was made very quickly with voice to text on my phone while I was walking out of the studio. I think they haven't necessarily said that it's impossible. The fans have made excuses saying that it's basically impossible, but I don't think BGS has specifically said that. So I want to correct that point. But a bunch of people like started discussing it. And I think like ACG puts in a good point here. Modders don't have to cert, and this seems to still require a random reload of the location to land, I think. So currently is flying through empty space with a load, sort of identical to the actual game, but with the cut hiding empty flight. Also, modders don't have to worry about what they do causing issues later, as we have sadly already seen with some Starfield or some other mods, maybe, I don't know. But people kind of hooked onto this, but I think it reflects an actual feeling and sentiment that people have, which is that Bethesda puts out a game that lacks a pretty obvious feature for the type of game it is, and then modders deal with it and fix it within a week or two on no budget, and it just seems to work. And yeah, it might cause other bugs, it might cause other issues, who knows, I haven't messed around with it, but at the very least they were able to do it, and you'd think that they could then bring them onto the team, or at least work through this with a team of hundreds and hundreds of people and millions of dollars at their disposal. You'd think they'd be able to figure it out and get it working. So the only thing you can decide, or the only conclusion you can reach, is that they don't want to. Because if modders are able to do it so effortlessly, seemingly, or at least so quickly on a non-existent budget, the only reason that Bethesda must be unable to do it is because they don't want to do it. And that's either for a design choice or, and this is what I think is more likely, because they know that modders will fix it with things like DLSS, bringing that to the game. They don't need to do it because they feel like modders will just fix it. Well, yeah, we could spend dev time working on it, but modders will fix it. Full native ultra-wide support that doesn't cause the unnecessary distortions. Yeah, we could work on that, but modders will fix it. And it's just time and time again. It's a thing that happens. And I'm frankly a little fed up with it, but their fans are not. And that's all that really matters for them, I think. He took my thing. Red flag.